Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Suspected intense US airstrikes have hit multiple sites across Yemen controlled by the Iran-backed Houthi rebels. Early reports from the Houthis suggest at least 7 people have been injured as military action resumes amid the ongoing controversy over the leaked signal chat on earlier Yemen attacks. Russian President Vladimir Putin has vowed to uphold Russian interest in the Arctic ahead of a US state visit by J.D. Vance. He also suggests that Ukraine should be placed under a temporary administration, with the White House dismissing his comments. Chinese President Xi Jinping says that free trade is facing severe challenges amid ongoing global trade tensions. Xi has been speaking with top international CEOs in Beijing. Meanwhile, new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says he will speak with US President Donald Trump in the next day or two as he battles the trade crisis. Carney says that nothing is off the table to defend Canadian workers. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has called a general election for the 3rd of May. Albanese's Labour Party are neck and neck with the opposition Liberal National Coalition in opinion polls amid cost of living pressures. Pre-dawn Israeli strikes in Gaza have killed at least 8 people as Hamas warns against protests in the Strip, saying it will help Israel. Some demonstrators have called for an end to Hamas rule as dozens are killed in the last 24 hours in Gaza. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has reaffirmed ironclad commitment to the Philippines amid rising tensions in the South China Sea. Hegseth meets with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as the judge in the signal chat leak asks for messages to be preserved. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets with Bangladesh's interim leader Mohamed Yunus in Beijing as the two leaders look to strengthen ties amid worsening Bangladesh-India relations following the ousting of Sheikh Hasina. Tensions between Canada and the US are escalating. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says the old economic and security ties with Washington are over. This comes after US President Donald Trump announced a 25% tariff on foreign-made cars, light trucks and vehicle parts. The new tariff takes effect on April the 3rd. Carney is holding off on an immediate response. He plans to meet with provincial leaders and business executives before deciding on countermeasures. He says nothing is off the table, including excise duties on key exports like oil and potash. Meanwhile, Carney says Trump's office has reached out for a call. The two leaders are expected to speak in the coming days, with the Canadian Prime Minister also campaigning for re-election, asking voters for a strong mandate to stand up to Washington. Let's listen in to what he said.
The question was whether the President and I have spoken following his office contacting mine to arrange the call. The response is we'll be speaking soon, certainly in the course of the next day or two. We will need to dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. We will need to pivot our trade relationships elsewhere. And we will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
Chinese President Xi Jinping, speaking to foreign executives in Beijing, expressed concerns about the current state of the world trading system. He stated that multilateralism and free trade are facing severe challenges, highlighting the rising threat posed by unilateralism and protectionism. Xi's remarks underscore the growing tension in global trade relations as countries increasingly prioritise national interests over cooperative international agreements. This speech reflects China's ongoing commitment to promoting multilateral trade frameworks while acknowledging the difficult global trade environment shaped by rising protectionists and isolationist policies worldwide. Let's hear to what the Chinese President Xi had to say.
当前世界开放指数不断下降下滑，单边主义、保护主义加剧，多边主义、自由贸易受到严峻挑战。我们要坚守世贸组织理念和规则，持续推动贸易和投资自由化、便利。
Moving on, and Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed a transitional administration for Ukraine under the United Nations auspices, aiming to organise democratic elections and later negotiate a peace agreement with the new Ukrainian government. Let's hear what he had to say.
И в принципе, конечно, можно было бы под эгидой ООН, с Соединенными Штатами, даже с европейскими странами, разумеется, с нашими партнерами и друзьями, обсудить возможности введения на Украине временного управления.
Meanwhile, Putin claimed Russia has the strategic initiative across the entire Ukrainian front line, insisting that Russian forces are advancing persistently and that the Ukrainian people themselves should understand what is happening. Here is his official statement.
Что происходит сегодня, в принципе, тоже понятно. По всей линии боевого соприкосновения наши войска владеют стратегической инициативой. И есть все основания полагать, я еще совсем недавно говорил, мы их дожмем, есть основания полагать, что мы их добьем.
Meanwhile, European leaders gathered in Paris for the Coalition of the Willing summit, rejecting any immediate relief of sanctions on Russia or discussing Ukraine's defence. French President Emmanuel Macron announced plans for European reassurance forces to be deployed to Ukraine after a peace deal. France has also announced a joint Franco-British mission to strengthen Ukraine's military. Leaders say Europe is mobilising on a scale not seen for decades. Let's hear what President Macron says.
Nous avons acté que le Premier ministre britannique et moi-même donnions mandat à nos chefs d'état-major des armées pour qu'une équipe franco-britannique puisse être déléguée dans les prochains jours en Ukraine et puisse travailler de manière très étroite avec nos partenaires ukrainiens qui ont acté également ce mécanisme pour préparer justement dans tous les domaines le format, ce que sera le format de l'armée ukrainienne.
Well, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni ruled out sending Italian troops but urged US participation in future talks, while Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk emphasised that Europe must engage the US, not on our knees. Here is what he said.
Dla nas kwestia dobrych relacji transatlantyckich jest strategiczna i one muszą przetrwać niejedną kadencję, niejednego premiera, prezydenta po obu stronach Atlantyku. Dlatego będziemy na pewno działali w sposób taki zdroworozsądkowy, spokojny, ale na pewno.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Putin wants to divide Europe and America, calling for unity. Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will co-lead a European coalition for Ukraine, with defence chiefs heading to Kyiv for further talks. Here is President Zelensky's official statement.
І рішення, які Америка сьогодні може продемонструвати, можуть реально вплинути на зупинку війни, на зупинку Путіним бажання, тому що він цього дуже хоче. І він, а вже ж дійсно хоче розділити Європу і Америку, саме Путін цього хоче. Ну і його вся ця машина Кремля, вона працює над цим не перший рік.
Poland's Prime Minister also called for a unified European policy on Russia, even if Hungary opposes it. The summit reaffirmed that now is not the time to lift sanctions, according to Starmer, while UK leaders stressed that European allies will ensure any Ukraine peace deal is enforced. Let's hear what Starmer had to say.
Now is not the time for lifting of sanctions. Quite the contrary, what we discussed is how we can increase sanctions to support the US initiative to bring Russia to the table through further pressure from this group of countries. And of course, we discussed further the plans for reassuring the peace, the coalition of the willing and the military and operational plans, whether they're on the land, the air or the sea, but was very strong support. And what came out most strongly from the meeting was so many countries standing, as they've stood for over 3 years now with Ukraine, standing in this crucial moment for as long as it takes. Vladimir, you have our support, and you must have felt that in the room, our full support for as long as it takes.
Let's move on. And Australia is heading to the polls. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has called a general election for May the 3rd, kicking off a 5-week campaign. Cost of living pressures are expected to dominate the race. Albanese met Governor General Sam Mostyn earlier in the day to secure formal approval. Under Australia's constitution, the Governor General must authorise the election. The contest is tight. Opinion polls show Albanese's Labour Party neck and neck with the opposition Liberal National Coalition. Key issues in the campaign will include climate action, nuclear power and Australia's housing crisis. Albanese is making his pitch to voters, saying Australia doesn't need to copy any other nation to build a stronger future. Let's listen to him.
This morning I visited the Governor-General, and Her Excellency has accepted my advice that an election be held on Saturday, 3rd of May 2025. Over the last few years, the world has thrown a lot at Australia. In uncertain times, we cannot decide the challenges that we will face, but we can determine how we respond. Our government has chosen to face global challenges the Australian way, helping people under cost of living pressure while building for the future. We live in the greatest country on earth, and we do not need to copy from any other nation to make Australia even better and stronger. We only need to trust in our values and back our.
We now head to North America, and the US has revoked over 300 visas as the Trump administration cracks down on foreign students. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed the move, saying officials are closely monitoring individuals deemed a threat. The crackdown follows the arrest of Turkish student Rümeysa Öztürk, a Fulbright scholar at Tufts University. He was detained in Massachusetts after previously criticising US policy on Gaza. Rubio did not confirm if her activism led to her visa revocation, but said the administration would act against those supporting movements that oppose US foreign policy. Öztürk's lawyer has challenged her detention in court.
You're not entitled to a visa. Nobody is entitled to a visa in any other country. They can determine it and they can revoke it at any time they want. Now, I think it's important. There's a clear distinction between protesting against democratic order and protesting in favor of groups that advocate slaughter, murder, and people, which is what many of these groups are supportive of. Beyond that, these groups are not just taking over. These are not sit-ins we're talking about. We are talking about buildings that have been vandalized, defaced, when they from months on end, and in some cases, we're just not going to continue to allow. I don't understand what people don't get. A visa is a gift. It's a voluntary thing. We decide to give you, basically. We deny visas from all over the world every day for a variety of reasons, and that means we can also revoke those visas. No one's entitled to a visa.
Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Bangladesh's leader Mohamed Yunus in Beijing on Friday, marking Yunus's first state visit since assuming office in August. The visit comes amid Bangladesh's efforts to strengthen ties with China, following strained relations with neighbouring India after the ousting of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Yunus is expected to sign agreements on economic, technical, cultural and sports cooperation. Discussions will also focus on the ongoing Rohingya refugee crisis, with China previously mediating repatriation talks with Myanmar. After a series of high-level meetings in Beijing, Yunus is set to return to Bangladesh. This visit highlights a shift in Bangladesh's foreign policy, signalling China's growing influence in its international relations. Back to North America, and Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has revealed plans to cut 10,000 jobs from the Department of Health and Human Services as part of a restructuring to focus on chronic disease prevention under his Make America Healthy Again initiative. The overhaul aims to save $1.8 billion annually by merging 28 divisions into 15, creating a new administration for a healthy America. Critics, including Senators Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer, warn that these cuts will hurt essential programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and disease prevention efforts. Kennedy's controversial views on vaccines and health, including downplaying the measles vaccine and questioning HIV's link to AIDS, have sparked concern among experts. The US is currently facing a severe measles outbreak, with almost 400 cases and 2 deaths so far reported. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reaffirmed Washington's commitment to its alliance with the Philippines. Meeting with President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., he underscored the importance of the Mutual Defense Treaty. Hegseth later met with Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. in Quezon City to discuss regional security. His visit is part of a broader trip to Asia aimed at strengthening partnerships. The US is reaffirming its commitment to the Philippines. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth met with President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in Manila, pledging full support under the Mutual Defense Treaty. Hegseth says Washington and Manila must stand shoulder to shoulder against regional threats. He singled out China, calling its actions a major concern. The visit is part of Hegseth's tour of Asia, reinforcing US alliances on the region. The message is clear: deterrence is key and the US-Philippines partnership remains strong. Let's listen to what Hegseth said.
And President Trump said, we're first and foremost going to secure our border. Border security is national security. And that's why the DOD snapped to right away to ensure we're prepared to lock down and get 100% operational control of our border. The American people deserve the safety and security of knowing who's entering our country and ensuring we understand where they're coming from. We welcome people coming to America. We want them coming legally. Otherwise, as the president has said, the border is closed to anyone who seeks another way of entering our country, because we need to know who's in our country. That's central in a dangerous world with adversaries who'd like to find a different way in.
In other news, a US judge has ordered the Trump administration to preserve messages from a leaked chat group linked to military plans in Yemen. The so-called Signalgate scandal erupted after a top journalist was accidentally added to this chat. The Atlantic magazine first exposed the breach, sparking intense criticism. President Trump has dismissed it as a witch hunt, lashing out at the publication and its editors. The judge's ruling covers messages exchanged before and after US airstrikes on Houthi rebels. The White House must now submit details on how it's preserving the records. Meanwhile, during a stop in Guam, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defended the Trump administration's national security policies. Let's listen in.
Deterrence is necessary around the world, but specifically in this region, in your country, considering the threats from the Communist Chinese, and that friends need to stand shoulder to shoulder to deter conflict, to ensure that there's free navigation.
Fresh US airstrikes have reportedly hit key locations in Yemen's capital, Sana'a, as well as areas in the northwest of the country. According to Houthi-controlled media, the Sana'a International Airport and a military command post in Al Tahrir were among the targets. Houthi-run Al Masirah TV labelled the attacks as US aggression, but casualty figures remain unclear. The airstrikes come amid escalating tensions between the US and the Iran-backed Houthis, who have been targeting shipping routes in the Red Sea and Bab al-Mandab Strait. Washington launched retaliatory strikes on March the 15th in response to these attacks. Meanwhile, a leaked conversation among US officials has provided little insight into the ongoing military operation in Yemen. The US military has yet to confirm details about the number of strikes or their specific objectives. Staying in the Middle East, and Israel's military says it has intercepted one of 2 projectiles launched from Lebanon, while the second landed inside Lebanese territory. This follows last week's Israeli airstrikes on southern Lebanon, which killed at least 8 people after rockets were fired towards Israel. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned that Israel holds Lebanon responsible for any attacks on its territory and vowed a strong response to any threats. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has denied involvement in the recent rocket fire and insists it remains committed to the ceasefire that ended last year's conflict. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that the fight against anti-Semitism is tied to the survival of free societies. Speaking at a conference in Jerusalem, he called out what he described as a resurgence of hatred driven by radical groups across the Middle East. The event, however, sparked controversy over the presence of far-right European politicians, some from parties accused of anti-Semitism. Analysts say that Israel's right-wing government is forging new alliances amid growing tensions with traditional Western allies over the war in Gaza.
Today we issue a similar warning. The fate of free societies is tied to their willingness to fight the scourge of anti-Semitism. For anti-Semitism legitimizes and unleashes wanton violence against a part of human society just because of the identity of its members. Not because of anything they do, but because of who they are.
A tourist submarine sank off the coast of Hurghada in Egypt's Red Sea, resulting in the deaths of 6 Russian nationals. The submarine, named Sindbad, was carrying 45 Russian tourists and crew members, while 39 tourists were rescued. No passengers or crew were still missing, according to local officials. Red Sea Governor General Amr Hanafi visited the injured, as shown in a video released by the government's office. The submarine, designed for underwater viewing, could dive up to 25 metres to showcase the region's marine life and coral reefs. The Red Sea is a popular tourist destination, but in recent years, several incidents involving tourist boats have occurred. Russian tourists play an increasingly significant role in Egypt's vital tourism industry. A stabbing incident near Dam Square in Amsterdam has left 5 people injured, including tourists from the EU, Poland, Belgium, and the suspect, who is a man who was overpowered by bystanders and later arrested, is currently hospitalised with a leg injury. Authorities say the motive remains unclear, but they are investigating whether the attacker targeted people at random. Amsterdam Mayor Femke Halsema assured that a full police investigation is underway, expressing solidarity with the victims and their families. Emergency services responded swiftly to multiple distress calls around 3:30 p.m. local time, finding victims scattered around Sint Nicolaasstraat in the city's historic centre. Witnesses described chaotic scenes, with one recalling an icy scream before panic spread. Another bystander reported seeing a young woman with a knife lodged between her shoulders. A large area around the Royal Palace in Dam Square was cordoned off and a medical helicopter landed nearby. Authorities are urging the public to submit any footage of the attack to assist with the investigations. Tensions are rising in South America. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned Venezuela of severe consequences if it attacks Guyana or oil giant ExxonMobil. Speaking in Georgetown, he reaffirmed U.S. support for Guyana in its territorial dispute over the oil-rich Essequibo region. Let's listen in to what Guyanese President Irfan Ali and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio have said.
Us from Venezuela were specifically discussed. Their blatant violation of the ICJ order and Argyle Declaration were noted.
We have commitments that exist today with Guyana. We want to build on those, expand on those, and we'll leave it for the appropriate time. But suffice it to say that if that regime were to do something such as that, it would be a very bad move. It would be a big mistake.
Well, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro hit back, calling Rubio an imbecile and defending Venezuela's claims. The dispute has sparked fears of escalation, with Washington signalling it could take action if tensions boil over. Let's listen in to what the president of Venezuela said.
Por ahí sale el imbécil de Marco Rubio, amenazando a Venezuela desde Guyana. Imbécil, a Venezuela no le amenaza a nadie, porque esta es la patria de los libertadores, esta es la patria de Bolívar. Imbécil.
Well, that is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest international news.